Hello and welcome to episode 52 of the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. My name is Susie. I'm your host and I am an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. Today I am going to be answering a listener's question, and this listener had put their question to me via the website. I will put the link in the show notes to where you can do that. You can send me a question or you can send me a topic that you would like me to do a deeper dive on in the podcast. The listener's question from today was book recommendations. This is something I get asked a lot on social media when I'm doing my lives, and it's actually quite a difficult question to answer, which is probably why it's taken me until now to actually do this episode, because depending upon where you're at in your spiritual journey, depending upon which paths and practices you're particularly drawn to, and depending upon how deep you want to go with things, would ultimately determine which books I would recommend to you on an individual specific basis. I love to read. I love to read all types of books, fact books, fiction books, spiritual books, non-spiritual books. So I'm quite well read in a lot of topics. And it's actually really hard to narrow it down to, okay, what could I recommend as general guidance for anybody on their spiritual journey? If you are somebody and you listen to this episode and you think, okay, that's all great, but I would love to know what books to perhaps learn more about the divine feminine energy, or what books to really do some deeper dive into esoteric teachings, just pop a note into the podcast page on my website and I will do separate podcast episodes on that. So today's recommendations are going to be extremely general for anybody on their spiritual journey at any stage on their spiritual journey. Before I get into the individual suggestions, I will remind you all here that no amount of knowledge is going to get you to where you want to go. Ultimately, you have to have your practices in place. Okay? So knowledge is great. I love to read. I love to hear different people's perspectives, different paths, different practices. I love to understand all of that. However, my priority is always my own individual practice. The information and the knowledge comes after the practice. So please do remember that, because you will get to a point on your spiritual journey where the knowledge is interesting, it's helpful, and absolutely learn. But if you're learning at the expense of your practice, you're going to stagnate. So now that caveat is out of the way, book number 1 is, of course, going to be How to Read the Akashic Records by Linda Howe. This is Linda's first book. She has written a number of books on the Akashic Records. This is the one with the orange cover. And this is a great introduction to the Akashic Records, how to read the Akashic Records, and what the Akashic Records are all about. Linda was amazing at bringing the information about the Akashic Records forwards in the 1990s, and I have a lot of time and respect for her work and the information that she shared. However, I will caveat that there are quite a few limiting beliefs contained within this book. And what I never want for anyone is I never want anyone to go into the Akashic Records with limiting beliefs that are going to limit your ability to connect to certain information. I was very fortunate in the fact that I was working with the Akashic Records before I read any of the Akashic Records books that are out there, and I think I've read pretty much all of them. And what you will see in all of the books out there is that book is written from the perspective of the author, of course, and their limiting beliefs come through in their authorship. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're human, we have these beliefs. But what I want everybody who is approaching the Akashic Records and they want to learn how to work with the Akashic Records is to try and keep as open a mind as possible. Try to identify limiting beliefs that perhaps come up and then try to drop them, because you're going to have a much more expansive, rich experience with the Akashic Records if you're going in with an open mind than you are if you're going to be crammed full of what you can and cannot do and what information you can and cannot get from the Akashic Records. All of that being said, this is a great starter book. There is a sacred prayer in there that Linda uses and that Linda, I believe, teaches. I don't know if she is still actively teaching, but this is a great foundation text for work with the Akashic Records. Number 2 that I think is suitable for anyone on the spiritual journey, and no matter where you are, you will get something out of, is, of course, Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. This book is a book that you can read time and time again, and each time you read it, you will get something new out of it. I think I've actually quoted from Yogananda's book in the podcast. I definitely have in my membership. It's so rich, it's so deep in respect of the spiritual journey. It's not only his story of his spiritual journey and bringing a form of yoga to the West from the East, his journey with his own masters, his spiritual experiences, but there are some very deep esoteric teachings and truths within this book. Depending upon the level of consciousness that you're currently at, will determine what you get out of it. And if you read this book once a year, I can promise you that you're going to get something different out of it each time as your consciousness expands. Another book that I think is very helpful for anyone on their spiritual journey is Ram Dass's Be Here Now. This is quite an eclectic book in respect of it has a bit about his journey. It has a middle section with some phrases and some pictures that can actually be very activating. And then there is what's called a cookbook section, which is lots of different practices. For those who don't know, Ram Dass's journey is extremely interesting because he starts his journey at Harvard doing work in psychedelic research with Timothy Leary. Now, Timothy Leary, of course, goes fully into the psychedelic world, whereas Ram Dass goes on pilgrimage to India. He finds his guru and he kind of leaves the world of psychedelics behind and goes into the more yogic practices, so breath work, fasting, meditation practices, kriyas, mantras, all of that. And what he does in the cookbook section is give you lots of different practices that you can work with on your own spiritual development. There's also a section on book recommendations, which a lot of the books in there I have read and I would also recommend to people. And I just think it's a great overview of different things that have helped someone who has walked the path before you. On that note, I think any book written by someone who has been through their spiritual awakening experience, who describes that experience, and who talks about what they have been through, the types of practices and things that they have used, can be very helpful if you bear in mind that everyone's spiritual journey and the development and the unfoldment is going to be individual and unique for them. As long as you're not looking at these books from the perspective of, okay, what did they do so that I can replicate that so that I can get to where they got to? If you're looking at it from the perspective of, okay, I want the inspiration and the guidance, but I'm going to forge my own path, these types of books can be really helpful. Number 4 is actually 3 books in one, I believe, and it's Levels of Energy series by Fred Dodson. This is a book that not a lot of people talk about, but I think it's a really helpful series of books, even if you just read the first book, because what Fred Dodson does in these books is he goes into what the different levels of energy mean from a real life perspective. So you've probably heard me talk before about charts of consciousness. There are different charts of consciousness out there. The most famous being Dr. David Hawkins' chart of consciousness. And the chart of consciousnesses that are out there can be really helpful to understand how the expansion of consciousness unfolds. So understanding that below a 200, for example, you're in a state of contraction. So anytime you're experiencing an emotion below that 200, you're going to feel this state of contraction. And understanding how to move through those different levels of consciousness. Now, where I think Fred Dodson's books are really, really helpful are for people who are perhaps working with people one-on-one, working in energy healing, working in coaching, all of these different fields, because what you're able to do is, if you understand your client's resonant frequency, so where they are usually at, of course, we go through different levels of consciousness throughout the day, depending upon our experiences of life. But if you're able to understand somebody's resonant consciousness, you're able to understand their worldview, their perspectives on different things that they'll be drawn to. And by understanding your clients at that level, you're going to be able to help them much more effectively and efficiently than if you are trying to impose your own perspective. Of course, everybody has different perspectives about the world, consciousness, their own experiences. We are all operating through a number of different lenses based on the programming conditioning. And if you're more able to understand where someone is coming from, you're going to be more helpful to them. The last book I'd recommend for everybody to read is Awakening Shakti by Sally Kempton. Now, this book is based on the Tantric tradition, so you do have to bear that in mind when you read it. Sally was a Tantric teacher. She was initiated into the Tantric practices. But where I think this book is brilliant for people is, in our day and age, we tend to not understand the complexity of our internal divine feminine energy, our internal Shakti. And what I think Sally does brilliant in this book is bring forward different aspects of our internal divine feminine. She does it through the Tantric system, but she really helps people to understand the different aspects of the feminine. So if somebody has a belief that internal divine feminine energy is just about openness and surrender, what you'll see when you study this text is that actually the internal divine feminine is also extremely powerful. It's also the dark goddess aspect. It's also the crone aspect. So I think what this will do is it's going to open your mind in respect of all of the different facets of the internal divine feminine energy through the archetypal system of Tantric teachings. Doesn't mean you have to go full in on Tantric teachings or Tantric practices. I just think it's a great overview in respect of that topic and a great introduction to that topic. It's certainly a book I recommend to lots of people when it shows in their Akashic records that they are completely dominant in internal divine masculine energy and that they're very disconnected from their internal divine feminine energy. This is the book that I recommend in those instances. I should, of course, also say here that I am not affiliated with any of these authors or their texts. There's no affiliate links or anything like that. Please do where you can, or support your local, smaller, independent bookstores, support your libraries. But these would be the 5 foundational texts that I think are worth everybody on the spiritual path reading at least once to give them a foundation in each of these different areas. I hope that you find these recommendations useful. I'd love to hear from you if you do read any of these based on these recommendations and how you found them. Of course, I will see you all next week for the next episode.